Let's see how she gets back, Ethan laughed, slamming the car door hard enough to make the windows rattle. The sound echoed down the cobbled street like a punchline to a cruel joke. I was still mid-sentence, mid-breath, frozen on the sidewalk of a tiny French town I couldn't even pronounce. The rental car peeled away, tires skimming over ancient stones, leaving behind a faint cloud of dust, and the sound of male laughter that didn't belong in a place this picturesque. Pete, Josh Cullen, they all laughed with him. My husband's friends, men in their late 30s, wealthy, well-dressed, the kind who thought mockery was just harmless fun when aimed at someone like me. I didn't chase the car. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My body forgot how to move. I just stood there with my fingers curled around the strap of my purse, like I was bracing for impact that had already happened. A group of tourists walked past, slowing just long enough to glance at me. Some curious, some amused, one woman with a pitying smile. A waiter clearing a nearby cafe table paused, shaking his head slowly, as if he'd seen it before. I wasn't sure what looked worse, the disbelief on my face or the sheer loneliness radiating off my body like heat. For a moment, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe Ethan would circle the block and come back. Maybe it was a joke, an ugly, idiotic joke, and the others would talk him down. I pulled out my phone, hands trembling. I dialed. Voicemail. Dialed again. Straight to voicemail. Texted, "This isn't funny, Ethan. Where are you?" Delivered. No reply. I tried Pete. Blocked. Josh. Blocked. Colin. No ring. Just silence. A weight settled on my chest, sharp and suffocating. This wasn't a spontaneous act of immaturity. This was orchestrated. They planned this. They watched me beg Ethan not to order another bottle of wine at lunch. They rolled their eyes when I suggested we head back to the hotel. "She's always managing you, man," Pete had said with a smirk, pouring another round. And Ethan, drunk and grinning, had followed me out, angry that I'd embarrassed him in front of his friends. I remembered his last words before getting in the car. "Your purse has your passport, right?" Then figured out. "You're so smart, Claire." Then the door slammed and they were gone. A breeze picked up, carrying the faint scent of lavender and bread from somewhere nearby. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it felt like the air was turning against me. I turned slowly in place, trying to take in my surroundings. Ancient stone buildings with shuttered windows, flower boxes bursting with color, strangers enjoying their wine under striped awnings, speaking in a language I didn't understand. I might as well have been on the moon. My legs finally moved. I stepped off the curb and started walking, not sure where I was going. My throat burned, but I refused to cry. Not here. Not in front of these people. Not while Ethan and his friends were still probably laughing about the look on my face as they drove away. I checked my wallet. 85 euros in cash. No credit cards. Ethan had offered to carry them earlier when my bag was too full. "Let me help," he'd said, with that charming smile he wore like armor. Now he had them. Now he had everything. I had enough money for maybe a night in a cheap pension and a meal if I was careful. Then what? A child tugged on her mother's sleeve and pointed at me. "Maman, pourquoi elle pleure?" I wasn't crying. Not yet. But the crack was coming. I felt it building behind my ribs. Pressure I couldn't hold off much longer. He really left me. In a foreign country. For sport. And I wasn't even surprised. I wandered the narrow streets in a daze, my sandals clicking against the uneven stones, the echo bouncing off old walls that had probably stood longer than my marriage. The town, charming just hours ago, now felt hostile. Every doorway a fortress. Every glance a quiet judgment. I wasn't a tourist anymore. I was something else. Something broken. Something discarded. I stopped in front of a weathered map posted near a bus stop, the kind meant to help clueless foreigners. All the names blurred together. French syllables I couldn't decipher in my current state. I pressed a trembling finger against the screen of my phone, searching for nearby hotels. The one Ethan and I had booked was nearly an hour's walk away. Too far. Too impossible. I searched again. A listing popped up for a budget pension just around the corner. I clutched my purse tighter and followed the directions like it was the only thing tethering me to earth. The pension was a crumbling building above a bakery, the scent of old flour and yeast leaking through the stairwell. The woman who answered the door spoke no English but read everything in my face. Fear, shame, desperation. She didn't ask questions, just handed me a key and showed me to a narrow room with a sink, a window facing a brick wall, and a single bed that sagged in the middle. I handed over most of my cash and mumbled, "Merci," even though I didn't feel thankful. Not yet. I collapsed onto the mattress and stared at the ceiling. My body was numb, but my mind raced. What if he didn't come back? What if this wasn't a joke? What if it was exactly what it felt like? Punishment. Humiliation. A message. You're not in control anymore, Claire. You never were. I checked my phone again. No new messages. No missed calls. Just my own words hanging in the void. Where are you? This isn't funny. Please answer. All delivered. All ignored. The next name I tried was Pete's. It rang once, then went dead. Blocked. One by one, I tested every number from lunch that day. Every one of them had cut me off like I was a virus. My husband didn't just abandon me. He made sure I couldn't reach anyone who could lead me back to him. I sat up slowly, the weight of it all sinking in. He'd taken my credit cards. He had our return tickets. My passport was in my purse, but that didn't matter much with 85 euros and no way to access money. I was stranded, utterly and intentionally stranded. At some point, I opened the window. The air was cooler now, the laughter from the cafe downstairs floating up like smoke. I watched couples sip wine, lean into each other, share small smiles. The world was still turning, just not mine. Later, I tried to sleep, but sleep only came in fragments, broken by the cruel wake-up of hope every time I thought I heard footsteps outside my door. At one point, I truly believed I'd hear his voice, that he'd show up with some cocky apology, blaming me for overreacting, twisting it into a misunderstanding we could fix. But morning came, and with it, silence. No knock on the door, no messages, no Ethan, only the slow, sinking realization that he wasn't coming back. Not tonight, not tomorrow, maybe not ever. The morning sunlight bled through the thin curtains, soft and golden, mockingly beautiful. I lay motionless, my body wedged between exhaustion and dread. My limbs ached from tension, my eyes dry from a night of false hope. I reached for my phone before even sitting up. Still nothing. I refreshed my messages like a gambler at a rigged slot machine, hoping for a miracle that wasn't coming. He didn't come back. The words pulsed like a heartbeat in my head. He really didn't come back. I forced myself upright and rinsed my face in the tiny sink, the water icy and metallic. My reflection startled me. Hair matted, skin pale, eyes ringed with shadows. I looked like a woman who'd been left behind. And I had. Downstairs, the scent of fresh bread rose from the bakery, warm and sweet. My stomach growled, but the thought of eating made me nauseous. I bought a single croissant and a bottle of water with trembling hands, counting out coins like they were sacred. I had maybe 30 euros left. Enough for lunch, maybe a cab ride, not for a hotel, not for a plane ticket, not for salvation. I wandered the perimeter of the town, scanning every street, every terrace, every cafe in case, by some miracle, I'd spot our tour group. Nothing. They'd moved on, carried away in their air-conditioned comfort to Florence or Nice or wherever their itinerary dictated. Without me, without guilt. It was on the third day that a cafe owner noticed me standing just outside his patio, unmoving for far too long. He approached gently, his English broken but kind. "Espresso? You look lost." I managed a nod, and he handed me a small cup without charge, as if he knew that pride was the last thing I could afford to hold on to. He pointed me toward the police station when I asked, "Help?" "My husband, he left." The officer there was polite, tired, unsurprised. It wasn't the first time he'd heard such a story. A missing husband, a tourist left behind, a filed report, a sympathetic shrug. Nothing more. That afternoon, I stood in front of a pawn shop window with my hand clenched so tightly my wedding ring cut into my skin. It wasn't the original ring. Ethan had replaced it on our 5th anniversary. A 2-carat diamond in a platinum band, his way of saying, "Look what I provide." At the time, I'd been grateful. Now I saw it for what it was, a leash disguised as a gift. With trembling fingers, I twisted it off. My hand looked bare, almost childish. I stepped into the shop, the bell above the door ringing like the opening chord of a new song. The shopkeeper, an older man with sharp eyes and no interest in pleasantries, examined the ring. He named a price far below its worth. I nodded. I didn't argue. Pride wouldn't feed me. It wouldn't get me out of this town. He counted out the euros in slow, deliberate motions. When he paused and asked, "You go home now?" "America." I hesitated. Home. The word didn't land right. Home meant explanation. It meant facing my mother's smug disappointment. It meant telling my friends, if I still had any, that I'd been abandoned like a forgotten suitcase in a foreign town. It meant listening to Ethan spin the story first, twist it into something that made me sound hysterical, unstable, too much to deal with. I shook my head. Instead, I walked to the bus station and stared at the departures board for nearly an hour. Place names floated before me like poetry I didn't understand. Marseille, Avignon, Aix-en-Provence. One word, simple and final, whispered through me like a pulse. Go. I bought the cheapest overnight ticket to a name I couldn't pronounce. I didn't ask where it led. I didn't care. I just knew it was away from Ethan, away from humiliation, away from the woman who had waited for someone to come back. The overnight bus rumbled through the dark, its dim interior lights flickering like dying stars. I curled up against the window, arms around my knees, watching the countryside blur into shadows. Every bump in the road jolted my spine, but I didn't care. I wasn't trying to sleep. I just wanted to disappear, to become one of the faceless travelers nobody remembered. I didn't even ask the name of the village the ticket was for. I only told the woman at the counter, "As far as this will take me." Sometime before dawn, the bus hissed to a stop at a desolate roadside bench. The driver muttered something in French and gestured toward the door. This was it, my destination, my escape, my nowhere. I stepped off the bus into a silence so deep it rang in my ears. No taxis, no signs, just a dirt road, a row of olive trees, and a faint purple haze in the distance, lavender fields, maybe, though I couldn't be sure. My phone had died somewhere around Avignon. My stomach was a hollow knot. My sandals, meant for city strolling, had cut into my feet. Each step felt like walking on glass. I kept moving. The sun began to rise, casting long golden beams across the sloping hills, turning the fields into something out of a painting. But I couldn't see the beauty. My vision blurred from exhaustion, pain, and something deeper, something nameless. A grief that didn't belong to the moment, but to a life unraveling piece by piece. I don't remember falling. 1 second I was walking. The next, the world tilted and my knees gave out. My face hit the dirt. Stones scraped my skin, and the sky swung violently above me. I didn't get up. I didn't try. Lying there in the dust of a foreign country, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. I was done. Whatever strength I'd been pretending to have had run out. I closed my eyes. If this was how it ended, I could live with that. Not because I wanted to die, but because I didn't know how to keep living like this, being a footnote in someone else's life. A burden, a failure, an afterthought. A voice broke through the silence. Foreign, urgent, feminine. Then hands, rough but careful, turning me over, lifting my head, brushing hair from my face. I blinked through the sunlight and saw a woman's face. Older, with skin like weathered parchment and eyes so kind they made me want to cry on the spot. "Fame?" she asked softly, then offered a metal canteen. I took a sip, the water cold and clean and miraculous. She touched my cheek, murmured in French, then pointed down the road. I didn't understand the words, but I understood her. She wasn't going to leave me. With surprising strength, she helped me to my feet, one arm around my waist, guiding me step by step. My body screamed with every movement, but I let her lead. I had nothing left to resist with, nothing to lose. Up ahead, a small stone farmhouse appeared between the trees, its shutters thrown open to the rising sun. The scent of lavender drifted through the air. I heard chickens, the soft bleating of goats. Life. She said her name was Margot, tapping her chest. "Claire," I whispered in return, my voice raw. Inside the house, time slowed. Margot settled me at an old wooden table while she moved around the kitchen like a memory, filling a basin with warm water, slicing bread, ladling soup from a heavy pot. I barely tasted it, but I ate. My body moved on instinct, grateful for sustenance, for touch, for someone who saw me and didn't look away. A man entered, older, suntanned, wary but not unkind. Margot spoke to him quickly, gesturing to me, then to a hallway. He nodded. "Henri," she said, pointing to him. "Her husband." He gave me a slow nod, as if to say, "You're safe here. For now." They didn't ask what happened. They didn't question why a foreign woman collapsed near their land at sunrise. They didn't look at me like I was broken. They just gave. That night, in a bed with whitewashed walls and a handmade quilt, I curled into myself and wept, not for Ethan or even for what he did, but because someone saw me lying in the dirt and chose to pick me up instead of stepping around me. I cried because I couldn't remember the last time I felt that kind of kindness. And I cried because some part of me, small and buried, still believed I might be worth saving. Morning arrived not with the sound of traffic or phone alarms, but with the low crow of a rooster and the smell of fresh bread drifting under my door. For a few seconds, I forgot where I was. I opened my eyes to whitewashed walls and sunlight stretching across a rough stone floor. The air smelled like lavender and would smoke. My body ached in new places, shoulders, calves, hands, but it was a clean ache. Not the tight, anxious kind I carried back in Boston. This one felt earned. At the foot of the bed lay folded clothes, a simple cotton dress and a pair of worn leather sandals. They didn't belong to me, but they had been freshly laundered. My own clothes were gone, probably washed too. The thought made my chest ache in a way I couldn't explain. I got dressed slowly, wincing at the blisters on my heels. When I emerged into the kitchen, Margot was already moving, setting down coffee, slicing dark bread, drizzling it with thick local honey. She looked up and beamed when she saw me, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Bon," she said, gesturing to the chair. I sat. The coffee was strong and almost bitter, but I drank it gratefully. The bread was warm, chewy, rich with oil and sweetness. I ate slowly, unsure how to say thank you in a way that didn't feel like an apology. When I opened my mouth to try, Margot gently waved her hand. She pointed to my feet, then to the window, where rain now traced soft lines down the glass. "Rest," she said. One of the few English words she seemed to know, and so I did. The next few days passed in a rhythm unlike anything I'd known. The hours bent around the land. No emails, no meetings, no obligations except the simple ones that sustained life. Margot showed me how to feed the chickens, how to tie bundles of lavender to dry in the pantry, how to sweep dust from the corners that gathered like old memories. Henri remained quiet but kind, fixing a shutter that clattered too loudly, leaving fresh fruit on the table, nodding to me each evening as if to say, "You're still here. Good." Each time I tried to gather my things and leave, Margot gently stopped me. Once, I stood by the door with my purse in hand, shoes on. She caught my arm, not harshly, just firmly, and led me to the fireplace. She opened a small wooden box on the mantel and pulled out photographs. One by one, she showed me faces. A young woman with Margot's eyes, a toddler with Henry's grin. Then she made a cradling motion with her arms and lifted her hand to shoulder height. "Lucy," she said, pointing to the young woman. "Canada." Her eyes filled with tears. "No, see." Then she turned to me. Her gaze softened. She didn't say it, but I understood. She'd lost a daughter, and somehow she had opened her home to a stranger and made space again. I placed my purse back on the hook. From that day forward, I helped without being asked. I rose early, watered the herbs, folded laundry, listened to the wind moving through the lavender fields like a lullaby. I didn't check my email. I didn't open my phone. The silence was terrifying at first. Then it became sacred. Each night, we sat on the porch as the sun dipped below the hills. Margot would knit with patient, practiced hands. Henri smoked his pipe and occasionally asked me questions with gestures, smiles, and slowly improving English. I answered the best I could. When we ran out of words, we simply sat. The betrayal still lived in my bones, but something inside me had begun to shift. The need to explain, to chase Ethan's version of events, to justify my hurt, it was all fading. In its place was something quiet, steady, and astonishing. Peace. The days bled into one another, not in the frantic blur of city life, but in a kind of gentle rhythm. The sky shifted from soft gray to blazing blue and back again. The lavender bloomed fuller, and I learned to tell by scent alone when the fields were ready to be harvested. I no longer needed to be told when to wake, when to eat, when to rest. My body learned the language of the land, its demands, its rewards. And in the quiet, something unexpected returned. Curiosity. One afternoon, while helping Margot sort dry bundles of lavender into small canvas sachets, I asked haltingly if she would show me how to distill oil. Her eyes lit up like I had just asked her to dance. That evening, she led me to a small stone outbuilding I hadn't noticed before. Inside was an old copper still, polished from years of use. She showed me how the flowers were loaded, how the steam captured their essence, how the oil rose and separated, pure, fragrant, golden. I watched her work with reverence. This was not chemistry. This was art. I began spending my afternoons in the workshop, labeling bottles with handwritten tags in my slanted, uneven scrawl. It wasn't long before I offered to redesign them. Margot looked confused, so I pulled out my phone, finally charged, finally useful, and showed her photos of my old design projects. Hotel interiors, restaurant branding, boutique packaging. For the first time since I'd arrived, I saw her look at me not as someone to care for, but as someone who could offer something back. The next market day, Margot and Henri brought me with them to the village. We loaded crates of oil and sachets into an old blue truck, the back seat rattling as we drove along winding roads. The market was alive with music and chatter, rows of colorful stalls lined with produce, bread, wine, soap. I helped them set up, arranging our products on the table, adjusting the signs, tying fresh bundles of lavender for decoration. "Stay," Margot said simply, as I handed a tourist a wrapped box of oil. I looked at her, confused. She gestured around the stand, then touched my chest, then hers. "You, me, work." I blinked. "You mean help? Like more?" She nodded firmly. Then Henri joined, placing a folded piece of paper in my hands. A crude but official-looking document written in both French and English. Partnership. They had drafted it together, with the help of a friend from town. Not a job offer. A stake in the business. I stared at the paper, emotions tightening my throat. I was still wearing borrowed clothes. I still flinched when a phone buzzed. I hadn't touched makeup or spoken to anyone from my old life in weeks. But here they were, two people who had taken me off the road, offering me not just shelter, not just purpose, but ownership, belonging. "I don't know anything about farming," I said softly. "Learn," Henri replied. His accent was thick, but the word rang clear. Margot reached for my hand. You already start. Tears sprang to my eyes before I could stop them, not because I was sad, but because for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to prove my worth. I didn't have to beg to be chosen. I was being invited to stay, not as a guest, not as a burden, but as someone valuable, someone home. I hadn't thought of Ethan in days. That realization came as I knelt in the workshop, sealing freshly poured vials of lavender oil and arranging them by scent profile, bright, grounding, soothing. The radio played something slow and melodic in French, and sunlight spilled in through the high window, warm on my shoulders. My hands moved with confidence. My handwriting on the labels had steadied. The table I once hesitated to touch was now my space, my task, my purpose. Then I turned on my phone. I hadn't touched it in over 2 weeks, except to take photos of the fields, the workshop, Margot's hands demonstrating a technique I wanted to remember. But that morning, something compelled me to check my old email. Just a flicker of curiosity. A window cracked toward the life I'd left behind. The inbox exploded. Hundreds of unread messages. Old friends, acquaintances, colleagues from a life that now felt like a dream. At first, it felt like I was reading someone else's mail. The concern in their words startled me. Are you okay? Where did you go? I heard what Ethan said. Please tell me it's not true. And then I saw it. Subject, I know where you are. From Ethan Bennett. My breath caught. My hand trembled as I tapped it open. Alexis! He never called me Claire anymore. Only Alexis, the name he preferred, the one he thought sounded more sophisticated. It's taken time and a private investigator, but I finally tracked you down. This has gone on long enough. I'm coming to bring you home and end this ridiculous tantrum. My flight lands in Marseille on Thursday. Be ready. Thursday. 3 days. My stomach clenched, not with fear, but with something colder. Anger. Disgust. And underneath it, the quiet thrum of resolve. I wasn't the woman he'd left behind anymore, and I wasn't going anywhere. I walked downstairs, the phone still in my hand, and found Margot at the kitchen table, going over accounts by the open window. She looked up, read my face immediately. Bad news from America, she asked softly. I nodded. Ethan, he's coming. Her expression hardened, just slightly. Margot didn't speak often about him. She didn't need to. Her silence had always been louder than any opinion. Without a word, she reached into the drawer beside her and pulled out a thick envelope. She slid it across the table. Was waiting for right moment, she said. Inside, the final, signed copy of the partnership agreement. My name, Margot's, Henry's. Not a promise, a contract. I wasn't helping anymore. I was a third owner. I had rights, responsibilities, a business. You choose what happens Thursday, she said, tapping the paper. Not him. I stared at the document. I should have felt overwhelmed. Instead, I felt solid, grounded. I belonged here, in this house, in this field, in this work. Ethan could try to come and take whatever he wanted, but he wouldn't find the version of me he remembered. The next morning, I contacted Caterine, the local lawyer who'd helped with the partnership. We drafted divorce papers, French and English, clear, firm, final. I printed them and folded them carefully into an envelope. I also replied to the email from my former mentor, the one who had recommended me for a remote design consultancy weeks ago. The offer was still open. I accepted. 1 foot back in the world I'd walked away from, but on my terms this time. Then I wrote short messages to the friends I'd left behind, not with apologies, but with clarity. I didn't need them to save me. I just wanted them to know I had saved myself. Thursday came. A blue sky stretched overhead. The scent of lavender clung to my skin. Henri and I were in the workshop testing a new batch of oil when we heard the sound of a rental car engine rumbling up the gravel path. Margot appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a cloth. "He is here," she said simply. I stood up, removed my apron, and stepped outside. The car door slammed, the sound too sharp for the quiet morning. Ethan stood beside the sleek silver rental, designer sunglasses perched on his face, his shirt crisp and untouchable. He looked entirely out of place against the backdrop of sun-warmed stone, wild lavender, and the slow rhythm of life here, like a glossy page torn from a lifestyle magazine and pasted onto a painting done in oils. He hadn't seen me yet. For a brief second, I stood there in silence, letting the image burn into my memory. Him, scanning the farmhouse with thinly veiled distaste, his jaw clenched, his hand on his hip like he was waiting for someone to come fetch his luggage. His arrogance still intact, his entitlement wrapped around him like armor. Then he turned and saw me. His eyes ran over my body, starting at the boots caked with dry earth, the work-worn hands, the sun-browned arms. My hair was pulled back in a loose braid, my face bare. No makeup, no performance. Just me. His expression flickered. Shock, confusion. Then something like disappointment. "My God, Alexis, what happened to you?" The words might have cut once. Not now. I took a step forward, calm, measured. "Life happened," I said. "And by the way, it's Claire again." He blinked. "Claire, then. Fine. Look, I get it. You were angry, hurt. But this," he gestured around him, dismissive. "This is over the top. You made your point. Now let's go home." I almost laughed. "Home?" I repeated. "You mean Boston? The brownstone I decorated but never owned? The life where I became small enough to fit into the corners of your image?" He stepped closer, his charm cracking. "Don't do this. We had a good life. People miss you. Clients, friends. They miss the version of me you curated." I cut in. The Claire who smiled on cue, who planned dinners for your colleagues, who stopped talking about her career because you said it was just a hobby. His face tightened. "It's not like that." "It's exactly like that." Behind me, I heard the soft shuffle of Margot and Henri stepping out to the porch. They didn't understand the words, but they understood the moment. They stood with me, not as backup, but as witnesses, as family. Ethan followed my gaze and scoffed. "So this is it. These people. This farm. You'd throw away everything for dirt and soap and strangers who don't even speak your language." "No," I said quietly. "I'm choosing something better." I reached into my pocket and held out the envelope. He looked at it like it might bite him. "What's this?" "Divorce papers. Drafted, translated, and ready to sign." His jaw worked. "You're not serious." "I am. You left me on a roadside in a foreign country. Ethan. You laughed while you did it. You called it a tantrum. I call it clarity. You showed me exactly who you are." His voice rose, angling for control. "You're being impulsive, emotional. That's not the woman I married." "No," I said. "That woman died in a small French town while you drove away. This one," I glanced at the fields behind me, the home I now helped run, the people who had asked nothing of me but honesty and presence. "This one was born here." He didn't move to take the papers, just stared, red rising in his cheeks. "You'll regret this," he snapped. "When the novelty wears off and you're still here hauling lavender at 60, I'll still be free," I said. "That's more than I ever was with you." Henri stepped forward then, placing a hand gently but firmly on my shoulder. He looked at Ethan and said something in French, slow and steady. Ethan turned to me. "What did he say?" "He said the road back to Marseille is long. You should leave before it gets dark." For a moment, Ethan just stood there, his hands clenched, his mouth a hard line. Then, without a word, he turned and got into the car. The engine roared. The tires spun. And then he was gone. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Margot stepped beside me, slipping her hand into mine. Behind us, the still warm kitchen waited. Lavender to sort, orders to prepare, dinner to cook. The man who once left me behind now had no place left to stand. And I had everything. The night after Ethan left, I stood in the lavender fields alone. The stars above Provence glowed like scattered embers. The air smelled of earth and oil, and a hint of smoke from the kitchen stove where Margot was still humming to herself. Crickets sang from the edges of the grove. Somewhere nearby, Henri was whistling as he fed the goats. Nothing about this moment was extraordinary, and yet it was everything. I wasn't waiting for someone to come home. I wasn't rehearsing apologies in my head. I wasn't shrinking myself to fit a man's silence. I was still and whole, and more myself than I had been in a decade. In Boston, I had lived in curated spaces, neutral palettes, designer furniture, the soft glow of staged perfection. And yet, somehow, I'd never felt like I belonged in any of them. Here, with calloused hands and sunburnt shoulders, standing barefoot in a field I helped harvest, I was home. The days that followed Ethan's departure unfolded like a second spring. I signed the final partnership paperwork with Margot and Henri beneath the grapevine trellis in our courtyard. We toasted with chilled wine and fresh cheese, and I laughed, truly laughed, as Henri held up the bottle of oil I had helped press and declared, "Claire's batch, best yet." Word spread at the market. People began asking for me by name. I redesigned our labels, launched a simple website with the help of a local teenager, and soon orders were arriving from tourists who had visited our stall and wanted to remember the scent of Provence. I woke early and worked late. I made mistakes. I ruined an entire batch of rosemary oil and nearly set the still on fire. But no one yelled. No one used my errors as proof that I wasn't enough. We cleaned it up, we fixed it, we moved on. It was revolutionary. One afternoon, Margot brought out a dusty photo album. She showed me pictures of Lucy, her daughter, in Canada. A wedding I wasn't invited to, she said with a small, sad smile. A baby I had never met. The distance hurt her more than she admitted. But when she looked at me, there was peace in her eyes. Not replacement, not fantasy, just connection. "Family," she said simply, pointing between the two of us, and I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. I didn't return to the States. Not for court. Not for closure. My lawyer handled the paperwork. Ethan signed the divorce documents without protest, likely too embarrassed to tell anyone what really happened. My share of our assets arrived in a sterile bank transfer, cold and quiet. I used part of it to renovate the workshop and buy new equipment for the farm. I used the rest to start saving. Not for escape, not for survival, but for the future. The consulting job for my former mentor blossomed into something real. Freelance design work for eco-conscious brands. All done from my kitchen table here in the hills of southern France. I had one foot in the world I'd left, but this time it was on my terms. No husband watching the clock. No guilt. No permission needed. Sometimes tourists ask how I ended up here. I smile, pour them a sample of our lavender oil and say, it's a long story, but it begins with getting left behind. Because that's the truth. Ethan didn't just abandon me. He freed me, and I used that freedom to become someone he never imagined I could be. Whole, independent, and finally alive.